This week on the show, we're going to be talking with Paul Schenk, chairman of the BSD Foundation. He's going to tell us about his experiences running BSD conferences and how regular users can get involved too. And of course, we're going to have answers to all your emails and latest news coming up on BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 66, the conference Connoisseur, recorded December 3rd, 2014. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
We're glad to be back this week after the Thanksgiving holiday here in the States. I know I took a couple days off, but I know you said you guys do Thanksgiving in October.
Yeah, so no holiday here, but I did get Thursday off because my other podcast was pre-recorded because of the holiday. And yeah, I took that time to get some extra work done. Got some machines put together and get some code written, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I must say I did sneak in a little bit of work on Friday and Saturday as well. Just a couple things here and there, getting packages built and whatnot. But anyway, glad to be back, guys. And of course, we have some cool news this week. Lots of BSD stuff happening. A little light on some of the quick headlines we'll do later. Yep. But that gives you guys time to get back into doing stuff this week. So let's get right into it. First up, we have some more BSD presentation videos to let you guys know about. And these are from the Meet BSD conference we were just at a few weeks back.
Yeah, the lightning talks have been, I think almost all of them are up now. There's a couple they're still working on. But Corey Vixie's one about writing web apps for embedded BSD. In particular, he's working on FreeNAS, but talking about how you can do this if you're making any other type of appliance. And
then I see this guy named Alan had a talk too.
I give a lightning talk about UCL and basically having a universal config format for lots of different applications. And since that time, I've written quite a bit of code on some of the tools required to do that. So one of the things we wanted was, well, if you're going to have all these configs in kind of this little more architected format, then, I want... The main reason I want something is I want something I can easily modify from the command line using Puppet or Chef or SaltStack or whatever. And so writing the tools that are actually able to do that is what I've been working on.
Make a sysadmin's life much easier.
And make it easier to automate the configuration stuff and, not having to write a separate tool or profile or recipe for each different config file. Because, there's like newsyslog.conf has its own special config format that no other tool uses. And then you have the same problem with every other tool. And so
isn't that just the way?
And so I give a little talk about some ideas for that. And since then I've spent quite a bit of time working on the tools myself and also working with the developer of libucl, which is a C library that parses all of this. We've made quite a few improvements there. And, I think my contributions have kind of sparked him to go and fix up a bunch of things that he had wanted to do but hadn't had time and so on.
Yeah, that inspires him to take it.
So he's been doing a lot of work recently as well. And so all that's up on GitHub under my account and his. And then there were other talks. Kip Macy had one about iflib, which is for a standard way of dealing with interfaces and stuff for networking.
Okay. Also, while we're talking about conferences, we do want to mention that the Asia BSD Con's call for papers was extended by a week.
So you have
I guess that makes the deadline this Friday. Yep. So if you're still wanting to get a paper in for these guys, go ahead and do it. You got a couple days from now
to get your free trip to Tokyo. You can do it.
There you go. Also, this year's Russia RUBSD Con will be held December 13th in Moscow. So that's about 10 days from now.
Quite a few interesting speakers there. Scott Long from Netflix, Sean Bruno from Limelight, but he's talking about building packages for other architectures like MIPS and ARM.
Okay, nice.
And Alexander Moten will be there talking about the CAM target layer and ZFS and SCSI targets and so on. Oh, and Baptiste will be there with overview of the last 4 years of PKG. So looking forward to seeing
I assume, the site's all in Russian, but I know not all these speakers speak
Russian. Well, I noticed
these talks will be in English.
Baptiste and Sean's talk and everything, it's the name of the talk is written in English and the name of the person is written in
Yeah.
English, whereas the ones
Okay.
that are going to be in Russian are written all in Russian.
So I guess it'll be an interesting conference. Some of it in
Yes.
part in Russian, part in English. I don't know how they do that if they have translators there to help those who don't speak one
Kind
of
of
those
reminds me of
languages.
the vendor summit at Asia BSD Con last year. Uh,
Yep. Yep.
a couple of the presentations were only in Japanese, and so George Neville Neal was live translating on IRC.
Yeah, that was fun. So we got the delayed reaction, like all the jokes just lost the punch. So like 30 minutes, 30 seconds later.
Yes.
Anyway, well
But
that's
yes,
cool.
if you don't think you can get your paper done in time for Friday for HBSDCon, BSDCon's call for papers is now open, and you have a
Yes.
bit more time for that. And BSDCon is one of my favorite conference, even though it's not really an exotic location. It's the capital of Canada, but it's one of the bigger ones, and it's very focused. And the Hackers Lounge there is just amazing.
Yeah, there's just such a good gathering of all sorts of BSD folks and from all the different projects there every year. So that one should definitely be high on your list to try and get to if you're anywhere in North America, or if you can get over here and willing to take the flight. It's definitely worth your time.
So the deadline for that is January 19th.
And we should mention it's been historically held in March, or excuse me, May. But they're moving it to June
we'll
this
have
next year.
better weather and less conflicts with other events. There was like a Comic-Con and a marathon that were happening around the same time, and it was causing problems with availability of hotel rooms.
It was neat to see all the Comic-Con people all dressed up.
Yes.
Though. I mean, that wasn't a
it
bad
was interesting. Most people look at a group of us and be like, those are the geeky people. And then you see all the people over here dressed up as, anime characters or whatever in comic book stuff.
One of the years, I forget which year, an Ohio Linux Fest I went to, there was a Comic-Con happening the same day in the same building. And it was like, I know they lost a lot of traffic, people walking over to the Comic-Con to see what's going on over there. It happens.
And Rick Miller says that VeriSign is investigating running FreeBSDCon 2015. It was really good last when they had it in 2013. So I'm really hoping they'll do that again, because that was a really nice event. I had a great time.
Well, that'll most likely be in the fall, and if they do it, I imagine in Virginia again. So that's easy for people on the East Coast of North America to get to.
So I really hope they do that.
Close to DC. Yeah. Go ahead and do it, Rick. We would like that. That would be fun.
Let us know what you need to help you get that done.
Cool. Okay. Well, next up in the news this week, we had a neat article. I saw this earlier in the week about a BSD-powered digital library in Africa. So I guess this is in Tanzania.
Tanzania.
I'm not sure how to pronounce the city.
Oh.
Yeah, how do you pronounce the city name? Nziga?
Something like that. I don't know if the end's supposed to be silent or what.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that works, but I apologize for my poor pronunciation of that, folks. But it's in the East African country. It doesn't have a whole lot of internet access. So with physical school books being rather uncommon there, a few companies helped out to bring some BSD-powered reading materials to the local school. So I heard about this a long time ago because IX was involved with this.
So they actually donated some FreeNAS minis to actually store the content on in such a way that if a hard drive dies, it's not going to delete anybody's books.
Not a big deal. But I guess they got them loaded up now. A bunch of these FreeNAS minis with 80,000 books and a bunch of accompanying video content stored on them. They say about 5 terabytes of data. And the school's workstations also got wiped and reloaded with FreeBSD. And everyone there seems to really be enjoying it. So that's awesome. A cool success story out in the field. Very good. And of course, we have links. You can take a look at some of the pictures there on the press release as well.
Yes, it's a good story.
Yeah, it's kind of a neat setup. Yeah, I'd like to see things like that happen. So next up, I know you guys, we have a lot of pfSense users out there, and they've been asking about the 2.2 version, when it's going to be done, what's happening, etc. So some of the pfSense developers have now provided us with a status update. It looks like 2.2 is going to have a lot of changes. Of course, first of all, it's based on FreeBSD 10.1, so that's going to bring in a lot of new stuff.
Originally the plan was based on 10.0, but because it took longer than they thought, they've already had to do the extra work to rebase it on 10.1. But that includes a lot of very good improvements, including that new IPsec work that they worked with the FreeBSD Foundation to sponsor. So, that benefited not just them, but everybody that uses BSD. But obviously they'll be getting that pushed in as well.
So also unbound instead of bind. They have a more recent PHP, and like you said, the IPsec stack updates, etc. So lots of good new stuff coming. Obviously, this is taking a bit longer than they had originally expected, but the post, if you want to take a look after the show here, has some neat graphs showing the ratio of open to closed bugs for the upcoming
Yep.
release. So
Yeah.
sounds like they're
Been working hard.
making good work on this. Cool. Okay, so what's the next story we have here, Alan, about recommended hardware
Yes.
threads?
So people posting up on Reddit asking, I want to build a little mini ITX, tiny little machine. Uh, or the first one here is I wants to make a little NAS running FreeBSD and some jails.
Hmm.
And so there's basically asking for people's recommendations. What hardware did you use? And what did you find that worked well with FreeBSD and so on.
Hmm.
And so there's a couple of threads here
A lot of
talking about
recommendations for low power Atom systems,
and
looks
different
like.
stuff people have tried and how well it's worked out.
Mhm.
Uh,
Okay. So then the second thread looks like it's about OpenBSD. What CPU architecture is best to run
mhm.
PF for an OpenBSD router? But that ended up kind of evolving into a whole other hardware
Yep.
thread.
And basically, the conclusions they had is that if you're building a router, something like the Alixes or the APUs and things like the Socris and the PC engines are probably the most favored for those.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
but obviously, if you want to run FreeNAS and do stuff, then you're probably looking at the Atom, which will save, not produce as much heat
Sure.
and save power. And
Hmm.
especially the server-based Atoms are, that's what the FreeNAS Mini uses. It has
Sure.
8 cores and can do the encryption offload, so it's plenty of performance. Although
Hmm.
and it's unlike some previous the older 2-core laptop type Atoms or netbook type Atoms, the server one can actually saturate the gigabit links without trouble. And the
Okay.
advantage to the server-based Atom boards is that they support ECC RAM if you want that. But if
Hmm.
you're building
Yeah, if
something
you'd like
small
to
for
spend
home,
the
you don't
extra.
have to do that.
Hmm. Very nice. Yeah, you just load one of those suckers up with a lot of memory and throw some disks at it, and away you
Yep.
go. Well, cool. Well, speaking of companies that sell
Yes.
hardware for BSD, of course, this is a good segue into our sponsor for the
Hmm.
week, which is IX Systems, of course, who, as we mentioned, builds a lot of Intel-based platforms, those mini Atom server Atoms for FreeNAS
Yep.
Minis, and everything bigger than that as well. They can do everything in
Yeah.
between.
I think one of the biggest
Um,
things is that they take the headache out of, well, is this configuration going to work?
mhm.
Am I going to have problems? Which does this driver work better than that driver or whatever?
Sure.
And, the people at IX know what works and they test the new hardware and make it work. Get the
Hmm.
fixes in so
They
that it
do.
actually works. And, you know, uh, the amount of stress that was relieved when I switched to just having IX build the servers for me instead of trying to do it myself. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, is this the right SATA SAS controller or do I want this other one? And, these are expensive. Buying the wrong one would be a big deal.
Yeah, yeah, that's an expensive, costly mistake. And, which NICs am I going to get the best performance
Yeah.
on, etc. So yeah, these guys know their stuff, and that's their sales guys are pretty much sales engineers. I
Well,
mean,
yeah,
they know their way around open source and
you,
can tell you what works and what
you
doesn't.
could tell from some of the stuff they write on the What's New page. Like the one sales guy was writing about why the number of spindles in your server still matters. Even, everybody talks about SSDs and so on. But now that we have the
Mhm.
larger capacity hard drives, it's tempting to just put, 4 6 terabyte drives in instead of 8 3 terabyte drives. Uh,
Mhm.
Even though sometimes the 8 3 terabyte drives will actually be a lower cost per gigabyte. Uh, but the big difference there is going to be the performance, right? You're not going
Sure.
to get
You're
nearly
losing
as
one extra
well.
channel.
You basically, yeah. You're if each disk is going to be able to pull 400 IOPS, having 8 disks instead of
Mhm.
4 disks means you're going to get literally twice the performance. And
Sure.
that can make a big difference, especially when you're hosting virtual machines and stuff where you're going to need quite
Mhm.
a few IOPS. The SSD based cache can help some, but eventually certain amount of the workload is going to hit the regular disks and not.
Yeah. Eventually, it has to hit the
Yeah,
backend
exactly.
store at some point and pull data from there. So yeah, definitely. And these guys know their stuff. But of
Exactly.
course, we should probably mention the URL,
Yes.
which is ixsystems.com/BSD now. go there, let them know we sent you. Get in touch with these guys and let them figure out what they can do to fix whatever problem you may have, whatever solution you need to
Yeah,
solve
I
your
think that's
business's.
the other big thing is that you don't tell them which server you want. You tell them what problem
Mm-hmm,
you have, and they will help you pick the right server that will solve the problem for you.
mm-hmm.
A lot of times people will be like, "Oh, well, I want this." I'm like, "Well, what are you going to do with it? Because you might actually want this one instead."
Yeah,
Because,
yeah.
like they said, you got to build it to be able to meet the minimum level of performance you require, right? So you can buy
Mm-hmm.
something that'll be able to go this fast, but if it'll never actually do that because of some other bottleneck, then that's not very much use to you, is it?
No, no, it isn't. Again, a costly mistake if you make that, but
Yeah,
these guys will help you sort it out
and
before you get to the point of making
and
that
the other
mistake.
thing is that they have the QA process, right? They're going to run the server for a couple
Mm-hmm.
days after they build it and make sure that everything's working properly before they ship it to you, so that you don't have any surprises when you get it. And the other thing,
Cool.
they have this worksheet that you fill out when you buy a server, and you tell them how you want it configured. So they can set up the
Mm-hmm.
BIOS, they can install the OS if you want, even if you're picky about how they do it, and make it just how you want. And yeah, very
Cool.
pleased.
Very cool. So again, ixsystems.com/BSD Now. Let them know that we sent you.
We're joined now by Paul Schenk of the EuroBSDCon organization. Thank you so much for being on the show with us.
Well, thank you for having me here.
And the chairman, I hear, is that right of it?
Yes, we have switched some roles, and I'm going to wear that hat for the next year.
Okay, fantastic. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So first question we ask everyone, how did you first get involved with BSD?
Oh, that's actually quite interesting. I was asked by a large FTP archive in the Netherlands to maintain the new FreeBSD section, and this was before 1.0 came out.
Interesting, okay.
So I've been there right from the beginning.
Definitely. So you put the first bits on the mirrors there. Is that
I
right?
put and maintained the first bits on the mirror, and then after a couple of weeks I thought, if I'm going to maintain that mirror, let me know what this is all about
Sure.
and try it out.
Sure.
So downloading floppies over a very slow modem line and burning the floppies and find a machine with compatible hardware, which was a challenge at that time, not now anymore, of course.
Sure, sure. Well, very cool. How about EuroBSDCon, since we're going to be talking about that? What was your first EuroBSDCon, or how did you get involved there?
I accidentally read on one of the FreeBSD mailing lists that two guys in the UK wanted to bring a BSD conference to Europe in 2001 in Brighton. And I thought this would be a nice idea, but still it's a lot of money. And then I found out that Greg Leahy was doing a kernel debugging tutorial, and then I knew for sure I had to come.
Sure, sure. I'll let you
And that was actually the first EuroBSDCon, and I haven't missed anyone since then.
That was held in, where was it held at?
That was in Brighton in UK,
Okay, Brighton, UK,
November
okay.
2001.
Nice.
Cool.
Okay.
So what about the EuroBSDCon Foundation? How did that get started?
So after the first conference in Brighton, other people have copied the idea and run another number of EuroBSDCon conferences throughout Europe, different countries every year. But they reinvented the wheel every year. They started from scratch and set up a website, start a program committee, and create a bank account, get some kind of payment system in place for the registrations, and they were all one-offs. And during the 8th conference, some guys asked me if it was time to do another conference in the Netherlands. And I said, yes, it feels like time, so let's do that. And that became the 10th edition. And we said, well, apart from celebrating the 10th anniversary, let's also give something really valuable back to the conference, a foundation that carries on the knowledge, the experience, and the resources that we've built up for future use. And that's become the EuroBSDCon Foundation that we know now.
Cool. So what are all the things that they assist with? I know you mentioned like payment processing.
Well, it starts with helping candidates to write down their proposal and do their budgeting and make sure it's at all feasible what they're thinking about. explaining them about all the duties that are involved, something about the timeline, what not to forget, because when you went late, then you really went late.
Sure.
And that's more the transfer of knowledge and experience.
Mhm.
Then we have a permanent website, a permanent registration system. The foundation handles all the finances for the conference now, so there's one bank account that's being used over the years, and also financial reporting is done by the foundation. So the local organization can fully concentrate on all the local issues, like finding a venue, getting hotel rooms for speakers, arrange the catering,
Sure.
find a nice location for a social event, and all these kind of things.
Okay.
So what are some of the challenges of actually hosting a conference other than the basic stuff? What are some of the things, I guess, that
Future people would probably want to know.
Well, it costs a lot of time and energy. People always underestimate that, but with the foundation behind you, it's no less time than it was before. But still, you must be very serious about this. It would be very helpful for people if they have some background in running a company, or at least you have one or two people in your team that's experienced in that field. Keep your timeline straight and make sure that you're not running late with certain points, because you can never catch up. Once the date is announced, you have to go for the date. What other challenges? I don't think there are any big challenges, but that's basically. Make sure that you've got a team for the local organization of people that you can trust, that do not walk away during the process. We have seen that in the past, leaving just one person doing most of the work, and that's not pretty.
Yeah, and don't forget that like a quarter of all the people here are vegetarians, and that complicates things. And people have other restrictions. And
The registration system has a field where you can specify your food requirements and these kind of things, like allergies. And we usually just have to hand it over to the catering, and then catering will make sure that there's enough food of the right type for everyone.
Cool. So how is the attendance here this year, and how does it compare to previous years?
Well, if we look historically, then numbers in the first 10 years greatly varied, something between 100 and 250, I think. And since 2011, when we started the foundation, we have been between 200 and 250 every year.
Okay.
This year, 225 registrations, which is right in the middle. So it's going quite well, and I think.
That's great.
Yeah. There definitely seem to be quite a few people here. So
Yeah. It was crowded at dinner last night.
Well, at dinners we always have some more people, because we allow people to bring partners and sometimes even more family members to our social event and our organized dinner. So that can be easily something between 300 and 400 people.
Yep.
And that complicates finding a venue and everything as well.
But if your conference were 400 people, you also had to find a place for 400. So that doesn't make a big difference.
Right. So what can other people do to help out with the EuroBSD Con Foundation and so on?
Well, first of all, we're always looking for candidates to run next editions of the conference. And as a candidate, you will be given access to our monthly board meetings, where we discuss both generic foundation issues, but also the progress of the organization of the current the conference to come. And it gives you a good feeling of what's going on, of the issues we encounter, and the timelines. And then we require you to do some research locally about venues, about dates. We almost made the mistake in the Netherlands in 2011 to run the conference in a specific weekend in a city where they also had a marathon. And that's not a good idea because it's
competing for hotel rooms.
you compete
and
for
all that.
hotel rooms, they close up streets, and public transport will be a mess. But we saw that in time and went to another city, and that's worked quite well.
Okay.
But yeah, these are the kind of things that you'll find out by following what's going on, and then you have to write your proposal and do some budgeting. And for the budgeting, we use the numbers of the previous years as a kind of a model, so you know at least what kind of things to budget for. And we already
approximately what it might cost.
and we have experience with a number of sponsors that we usually get. There are some recurring sponsors, and it's always a challenge to find some local ones in the country where the next conference will be held, but that's partly the task also of the local organization.
Sure.
And when the budget is accepted by the boards, then we go ahead.
Cool.
That's roughly how it works. Oh yes, and also we asked the people who have organized the conference to stay on the board for one more year, so they can share their experiences with the next team.
That makes sense.
Right.
Makes
And
sense.
what about more permanent people? Like, obviously, the point of the foundation is to carry things on the long term, not just
Yeah. Well, we
Flavor.
started with 3 of the organizers of the EuroBSDCon in the Netherlands 2011. Unfortunately, I'm at the moment the only one left from that team, but we have acquired some other people that we picked up in the years in between. The board, of course, has the standard chairman, treasurer, and secretary functions, and we have also written in our rules that there must be at least one representative of every major BSD project. So currently we have one representative for FreeBSD, one for OpenBSD, and one for NetBSD.
Sure.
And that is to make sure that all the BSD projects get an equal opportunity during the conference.
Makes sense.
There have been some complaints in the past by particular projects that they were given less exposure than others, and I think we have fully straightened it out now.
Good.
And,
Yep.
All right.
and all the projects are very happy.
Yeah, well, definitely. We've seen quite a mix of all the
Yeah.
projects here.
And
And
I think a record number of NetBSD people here this year, I think.
yeah.
The number of NetBSD people is picking up this year, and OpenBSD started picking up, I think, last year or 2 years ago already. And I even saw some talks about Dragonfly BSD, which makes me very happy.
Yes.
So we are open to
rarely
all.
getting out to conferences, so it's good to see them here.
Yeah, we are open to every BSD and derived product, and we're happy to have them all represented here.
Oh, very cool. So shifting gears just a little bit, what are you involved with BSD now in general? Are you using FreeBSD?
Well, after I started playing with this first FreeBSD back in 1993, I think it was, I quickly converted all my customers at my own company at the time towards FreeBSD. So for the 20 years following, I've almost exclusively been using FreeBSD as an operating system. And well, for some practical reasons, I've decided last year to get a job at a large company, one that's well known for search engines and then mail servers and stuff like that.
Sure.
But my own machine still all run FreeBSD, and I keep working on it, I keep following it. I've never been a committer, by the way. I've always been helping out in other fields than writing code.
Well, see, that's something I want to point out for the listeners too. A lot of people assume, well, I'm not a developer, I'm not a committer, so I can't get involved. Or like the lady we interviewed earlier, like, oh, I'm not a programmer, I can't do anything. Not true at all.
I'm not a programmer either.
Yeah,
Well,
not true at all.
You really need so many different people doing all kind of different functions to get a project like whether it's FreeBSD, OpenBSD, or NetBSD running and alive for a longer time. You need developers, obviously, but you need people to teach. You need people to spread the word, to do
And
marketing is maybe.
Yes, but even in the end, you need users. Otherwise, there's no point in developing it.
Yeah. And to attract users, the conference is, of course, a great platform because here users can meet the developers. And I've seen numerous times that people were so surprised that they bump into the big icons of this world, the people who have really put their rubber stamp on the future. And they appear to be very accessible and
Right,
lovely
yeah.
people to hang out with. And this enthusiasm that you can pass on to users, it's really what makes the projects work.
Cool.
And I think, the users provide the developers with a different perspective, and
The conferences
It's-
are kind of like the fertilizer that allows the stuff to grow.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
you get so many ideas, and inspiration comes from just talking in the hallway
and I
with
guess
somebody.
even you said the conferences usually have the tutorials the 2 days before, which are also very good for attracting users.
Yeah, that's usually one of the reasons for users to come, and we have even seen years where users specifically came for the tutorials and then, oh, let's do the conference too.
Mm-hmm.
But tutorials are a very great way for users of BSD to get to know their system better, to learn specific skills, and learn them from the people who have either written the code themselves or are using it on a daily basis.
Right, yeah, because oftentimes the tutorials are even taught by people that aren't developers. They're just people that
They're quite
know the
often
subject.
taught by the developers, the people who have written the code they're talking about. So
Right, but not exclusively.
Yeah, well, sometimes you have
it's always
experts in the
teams.
subject.
It's always teams. Yes. Yeah.
But you used to do a tutorial on.
Oh, I've done many tutorials during many of the BSD conferences, both here in Europe and other continents. And then I was talking mostly about code that I have not written myself, but it's stuff that I've been using for 10 plus years.
Right, well,
So-
especially, your most recent one was just on everything about storage, right?
Yeah, it was a recap of my experiences of the last 20 years using FreeBSD and setting up servers, setting up desktops, setting up laptops, setting up embedded systems.
Sure.
And well, actually, this tutorial occurred because I read some email on one of the lists where a sysadmin told, I'm a little bit behind on reading what's new. I've heard there's a lot of new stuff going on, like the GPT partitioning, like encryption, like the ZFS file system. Now I'm about to set up a new bunch of servers. Please guide me. What should I choose and how should I organize that servers? And that made me think maybe we should make a summary, a broad overview of everything that pertains to storage under FreeBSD and at least give people the tools and the background that they can make the right decisions.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think that's important because oftentimes, specifically in the area of setting up a server and something, that's often not something the developer would do. So a developer might not actually have the experience to impart to a user on this is how you actually implement this thing that somebody else built.
Yeah.
Because the developer built the features, whatever, but hasn't maybe
Done it at a mass scale or anything.
deployed a lot of servers.
Exactly. So apart from developers, of course, systems needs its administrators. And what's better to learn the trick from system administrators that have done that for years and know all the ins and outs of systems.
Yeah, so I think that gets to the point that you don't even have to be a developer to end up presenting at EuroBSD.
No.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You can-
Absolutely not. No,
exactly.
you can help out in so many ways, and I know several people walking around on this conference and well, every conference that are absolutely involved in maintaining the documentation. For developers, it's not considered sexy to write documentation. We try to persuade them to do that as good as possible, but still there's a lot to be won on that area, and I'm very happy that some of the people are fully dedicated to updating the documentation, make sure it reflects the current situation of what software we are using, and expand where parts are missing, and there's so many different ways you can help out in a project like this. That's, I think, the beauty of a project like this. It's not like a monoculture of only developers that talk about algorithms and the bits and the bytes and the coding style and stuff like that. It's much broader, and people with so many different backgrounds can feel at home here.
Yeah. Well, cool. Is there anything else you want to mention before we wrap up?
Well, I think we have said it all, basically. So.
Okay. Thank you so much for being on the show with us this week. We
Yes,
appreciate it, Paul.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. It was
Thank you.
very nice.
And we will see you at another EuroBSDCon or next conference.
Well, since I missed none of them so far,
Right.
and I'm probably the only one, I cannot afford not to go to the next ones.
That's right. That's right. So look forward to seeing you next time.
Okay, folks, before we hit into the news roundup, of course, we want to mention their sponsor this week, which is TarSnap. And again, the URL, tarsnap.com/BSD Now. Don't be one of those folks who loses data. It's so preventable. I mean, this is 2014 going into 2015. We have ways to solve this now. There's no excuse. And TarSnap's an excellent way to do that because you're keeping your data off-site. So if your building burns down, gets hit by a flood, tornadoes. I remember a previous job I had where I did a lot of tech support. Somebody had a flood at their business, and of course it wiped out all their external drives. And I think they were using tape back then too. So storing your data offsite is very critical. But if you're going to do that, do you trust the people that are offsite? And the neat thing about TarSnap is you don't have to. It's encrypted before it gets sent. So as long as you keep your key private, you are in good shape. They cannot turn over your data to any agency or other group or hackers or whatever because it's already encrypted.
Yes, you're protected by the crypto, not by TarSnap.
Correct.
And
correct.
The other thing is that they have a really good diff algorithm that finds, rather than using a fixed block size to find, which blocks are different, which ones aren't, to decide what data has changed to send it to the server, to save how much bandwidth. But, if you're backing up off your laptop, especially when you're mobile, one of the reasons Colin wrote this was he was traveling to a bunch of conferences and was worried he was going to lose or break his laptop. And, he needed to, well, in order for the backup to be useful, he has to back up the stuff he writes while he's on the road. And so he needs to be able to back up his data without sending a lot of information. And so it has
incrementally.
Yeah, and so the incremental backup algorithm uses a dynamic thing for finding the differences. He gave a talk about it at EuroBSDCon 2013. And showing how it worked, and it's quite interesting how it. He showed how if you use a fixed block size and you change a sentence, you change two words or one word that's in the middle of the block, and it'll end up changing both of those blocks. When really your change was, 2 letters or something, you don't have to change two entire blocks. So his algorithm is really interesting, and that, saves bandwidth, which saves you money and time.
Correct. And, speaking of money, it's really inexpensive to get started with TarSnap. If you're backing up a small amount of data, I mean, $5 may last you a long time because it's pay as you go for what you use. So again, go to tarsnap.com/BSD now. Let them know we sent you and get set up right now. Okay, let's head right into the news roundup now. So we got an interesting article this week, another Reddit thread about a user talking about switching to BSD from Linux, and he goes to the community for some encouragement, which we're seeing a lot more and more of these now, so this is pretty cool. But he said he's been a Linux guy for almost 20 years, and he's ready to switch his system over, and he's looking for some helpful guides to the transition. But first of all, part of the reason I guess he said he wanted to switch is he's used Linux forever, but systemd, udev, dbus, HAL, Pulse Audio / kitchen sink is finally getting on his nerves, so he's ready to do some FreeBSD help. But this is pretty cool. So again, we're seeing lots of these. Any big takeaways you want to mention on this one, Alan?
No, it's just interesting to see that he's actually getting useful answers and not just trolling that you would have seen in the past.
Yeah. A lot of people are now, offering good advice and helpful things that, if you're interested in switching yourself, you may want to take a look, read some of the comments. There's a lot of helpful info there.
But I think the biggest one is if you're coming from a desktop distro, you probably want to start with PCBSD, because if you start with FreeBSD, you'll be like, where is everything?
Yeah, right. Where's X and stuff?
PCBSD, it'll still be FreeBSD underneath, but it'll give you that starting point where you're further ahead, and then you can learn at your own pace instead of...
It's FreeBSD minus the 5 hours of initial setup.
And that takes 5 hours if you know what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's right. But no, it's got all that out of box, and it's using package ng just like FreeBSD as well. So once you get it up and running, it's no problem to open up a console and then start hacking it to the way you like it. I think somebody mentioned in the comments, well, I don't like that they force particular desktop environment on me. Well, we haven't done that in, 4 or 5 years now. We offer, I think, 20 some odd desktop environments out of box on the install DVD. So pick what you like, and if you don't like any of them, just use Fluxbox, package add your own, and away you go.
Yep.
Like not very difficult. So
Yeah,
this
and
is cool. A neat thread to read.
if you're one of the people that has switched from Linux and there are little tidbits you'd like to share, the FreeBSD docs team is working on trying to make a little switcher's guide that has things like, the package alternatives to the apt or yum commands, and but not just those. A lot of the other things, like, if you're looking for how to change the time zone, this is how you do it on the various Linuxes, and this is how you would do it on FreeBSD. On FreeBSD, time zones are easy, right? You run TZ setup.
Like a quick reference guide for those who are already familiar with Nix in general, but
it's
some of the specifics.
It reminds me, you had mentioned there was something like that for people used to SVN switching to Git. And then I used something similar when I was first learning MongoDB. It's like, this is how you do it in SQL, and then this is what it would look like in Mongo.
I've done this a couple times. I remember doing the CVS to SVN switch in FreeBSD and reading the docs on that, and then later to Git. So,
those little switcher guides just help you get that little bit you need to get over the hump to get started.
Correct.
So if you want to help out with that, definitely email docs@freebsd.org.
Okay. So next up, we have some information about running FreeBSD as a Xen DOM 0.
Yes.
So I guess there's still been some progress being made on that for FreeBSD to be a host for Xen hypervisor.
Right. This has been kind of like in the works for years, but it's actually to the point where you can use it now. So over on the zenproject.org wiki, they have a guide that explains how you can set up FreeBSD as a host for Xen. Been able to run it in Xen for quite a while, but being the host is something they're planning to have ready in time for FreeBSD 11. So it's good to see that it's actually at the point here of being usable for testing. You need a box that has an Intel CPU with EPT, so same requirement as Beehive. And this guide assumes that the user has already installed some version of FreeBSD on their machine, whether a release or a snapshot or something. In the case of the example, he had done a ZFS on root install, but either way, the first thing you do is check out the branch of FreeBSD that's been modified for PVH DOM 0 on FreeBSD.
That's in Xen's repo, it looks like.
So you check out their version of FreeBSD, and then do the regular build world process. So you link to the FreeBSD handbook to basically overwrite your system with their version of FreeBSD. And then you install, you need Mercurial and Git, Bash, Python, PackageConf, Gmake, Perl, Markdown,
Pixman,
even,
etc.
A couple things like that. But then you can check out you can check out Xen itself and build that using GCC 4.7. And then you just put the right stuff in your rc.conf. You enable Xen Common. You set up a bridge interface and link it to your physical NIC. You create the Xen console port. And then you configure your Xen command line. Tell it how much memory the host gets, how many CPUs you want to allow, whether you want the physical virtualization stuff on, and set what console you want, COM port you want to use for the console, and the log level, and so on. And then you can, when you're booting up the system, you can load the boot Xen kernel, and then you load your kernel modules like ZFS and so on from your regular kernel, and then you're ready to go. So then
he's got an example of how to install Debian.
Right. So it can do two types of guests: para-virtualized and the hardware virtualized. So para-virtualized is where the kernel's been modified to work with Xen, and this was originally, especially before hardware virtualization, was you had to do this to make it not slow. So Debian has basically almost as a different architecture support for Xen, and so you can download their Xen images and build those and run it. In this case, he's using ZFS and using a zvol to back the virtual machine, and it shows the process for that. And then a little bit further down, he shows how to do a HVM guest, which is the hardware virtualization. And in this case, he's running the stock FreeBSD 10 release image.
Okay.
And so you just boot that in HVM, and you can set how much memory you wanted, how you want to do the network, how you want to set up the virtual CPUs, and then you're good to go. It shows you can run your
Okay.
tap device, create your FreeBSD, and then VNC into your virtual machine, and you're good to go.
So at the bottom, he has listed a couple of things that they're still working on that aren't present yet. I guess missing MSIX PV interrupt support, which needs to be done in FreeBSD. PCI devices with virtual functions may not work correctly. That's FreeBSD.
So what that's for is if you have one of the newer Intel NICs specifically with virtualization features, you can have say a single port Intel 10 gigabit NIC, but it will have a bunch of virtual functions that basically are virtual extra NIC ports. So you can pass each virtual, you can use hardware pass-through to pass each virtual function through to a different virtual machine. So you can actually basically be doing hardware pass-through of the NIC into multiple virtual machines by basically, it creates these like ghost NICs.
Nice.
And that way you can have all those NICs being hardware pass-through, but they're all actually using the one physical NIC instead of having to do bridge. And then all the work of dealing with the network packets is done by the network card instead of having to be virtualized. Or handled by the guest.
Well, that's not in yet. We need that. That would be cool. But they're also missing some migrate, save, and restore support for guests. So that's actually Zen side.
That's something that needs to be done in Zen so that you can do live migrations and pause and resume and so on with FreeBSD as the host. And then lastly, they have the PCI pass-through support isn't ready yet. And I'm guessing that's the MSI or the virtual functions is pretty much the same idea there, I think.
Probably related to that, yeah. Well, cool. That's a neat article. So if you guys like to play out with FreeBSD Zen host, go ahead and check this out. It's going to be a very helpful guide to get you set up. Okay. Well, next up, we have some HardenedBSD news. So for those who don't know, HardenedBSD is a fork of FreeBSD where they're focusing on hardening it, of course.
So they work on basically security fixes, and then once they're ready, they try to get those upstream back into FreeBSD. So part of what they've been doing is culling stuff to make their lives easier. So for example, part of the work that they do is having to make sure that when they add these security enhancements that it doesn't break anything. So they're basically looking at cutting out some features that are hard to test. Specifically, they're killing the A.out executable format. So the name for I did a quick Wikipedia on it. The name stands for assembler output, and it was coined by Ken Thompson as the fixed name for the output of his PDP-7 assembler in 1968.
Wow. Okay.
FreeBSD, which was what HardenedBSD is based on, switched away from A.out between FreeBSD 2.2 and 3.0. So it's been a long time since anybody's actually used A.out extensively. And so, actually, I think they mentioned that currently on FreeBSD, there's no way to actually produce an A.out binary. So basically, this is breaking backward support for running binaries from prior to FreeBSD 3, which I've heard of people doing every once in a while, but it's not something that the HardenedBSD project would have to worry about. And so,
So I guess you can't run FreeBSD 2.2 in a jail anymore.
Right. I was just the other day, I was on the mailing list. I think Julian Ellisher was mentioning he's still running FreeBSD 1.0 binaries in a jail for fun or something. But then apparently he has some appliance or something that still needs FreeBSD 2 binaries for some reason.
Wow.
I don't know.
Oh.
But
I don't
yeah, so it makes sense for them to remove that because they can't test it and make sure they're not breaking it. And so, yeah.
Looks like there's also some information on a restriction against null mapping that was introduced in FreeBSD 7.
So there's a sysutl security.bsd.map@0, which basically allowed compatibility. Normally, when you try to create a memory allocation at null, it won't work. So it would basically null would be equal to 0, so it would write it at the beginning of the application's memory space. And the problem is that if there was a bug in the kernel and someone had written some code to that spot, it could cause the kernel to execute that code from user space. And so in FreeBSD 7, they introduced this sysutl, which allowed you to turn to lock it down so that it wouldn't allow mapping at 0. And then in FreeBSD 8, they made the secure mode the default. Basically, at FreeBSD 7, there were still a couple apps that depended on that to be able to work properly.
Sure.
Usually, they depended on it because of a bug. They didn't actually mean to depend on it, but and so that sysctl has been sitting around for a while now in case you have an application that required it to be able to work. But it's been, the insecure mode has been off by default since FreeBSD 8.0. But HardenedBSD has just removed it entirely because they don't want to support doing that. And that restores the behavior to what it should be. If you try to dereference null, you get a seg fault in your application, which is what's supposed to happen. Cool. So to make broken applications crash, which is what's supposed to happen.
Which is what it should do. Yeah. Also, they have an update about their package building, and they're working with a more consistent repo now, and also no more i386 packages.
Yeah, so they only had so much room on their web server, and they were having the problem, which I remember we had to try to solve for the PCBSD repo, of while they were in the middle of uploading the newer packages, what would be on the repo would be incorrect, because either the packages wouldn't match the digest file, or the digest file had the hashes of the new files, and you hadn't uploaded the files yet. So either way, they wouldn't be consistent. And the problem was they didn't have enough disk space in order to have the AMD 64, the i386, and the new AMD 64 to replace the other one. And so by getting rid of i386, they now have room to have the main set and the staging set kind of thing. So they can stamp those in place.
Okay. Well, very cool. Very cool. So yeah, keep up the good work, guys. That's Sean Webb over there with the HardenedBSD project working on that. So it's always exciting to see what they're doing.
And if you want to know more about that zero mapping feature, there's an errata notice from like 2009 that explains how that came about and how it works and so on. And I linked that in there as well.
Okay, folks, time for the question and feedback segment. So let's hop right into it. We start this week with Boris, who has a question about ZFS versus hardware RAID. So he says, hello guys, you've mentioned multiple times that it's better to use ZFS on raw disks. Yes, we have. He said, however, ZFS doesn't support individual drive status lights and auto rebuild than the hardware RAID controllers do. What would you say about using ZFS on a hardware RAID 6, 50 to 200 terabytes big, in the case that performance isn't a priority, say for archive storage, but reliability and ease of support are? He said also, how good is the FreeBSD support of HP Smart Array controllers, especially the P812? Thanks for the great show. Do you have any experience using that one, Alan?
There's a couple things I mentioned here. ZFS doesn't support using the individual drive status lights is kind of true, but that's because that's not what ZFS is supposed to do. In this case, it's that the drivers for the disk controllers, like the LSIs or the HP Smart Array or whatever, don't expose this into FreeBSD's dev LED system. But yeah, usually the hardware controller will set the drive status light itself. If a drive stops responding to commands from the controller will set the faulted light. Now, in this case, ZFS doesn't have the ability to cause that light to turn on, but neither does any other file system, right?
Yeah.
And then
you're asking a little too much of the file system.
For auto rebuild, it depends. If there's just some corruption detected or whatever, ZFS will auto repair that. If the disk dies entirely, then yes, you have to swap something in. Now, if you have spares, in ZFS, spares are just marked as spares. They don't get applied automatically unless you have a daemon that does that. There's work towards having an official one of those, but you can also trigger that kind of manually or whatever. The biggest thing is if a disk dies, you pull it out and swap in a new one. It's not going to be used automatically. It's going to require someone to run the extra command
to online it.
Yeah. And there's not that much you can do about that. I understand what he's saying there. But in particular, running ZFS on top of one big RAID 6 is not going to provide you, he specifically says his goal is reliability. And you're going to lose all the reliability of ZFS. Because if you only have one device in ZFS, that's a no redundancy pool. And so if ZFS does detect corruption, or if you do have the problem with the write hole in your RAID 5 or 6, where it wrote to the one disk and then calculated a new parity, but hadn't had a chance to write that yet because power went out or whatever, or the controller crashed, or the OS crashed or whatever, then it's not going, when it reads it back, it's going to think it's corrupted and it's not going to know which one's right and it's not going to be able to do anything. So if you have to use the hardware controller, what I recommend is create at least 3 devices. Create at least 3 logical devices. So instead of making one giant RAID 6, make 3 of them at least, and then use ZFS on top of that.
Now you get some of its reliability.
Yeah, basically you need at least 2 devices in ZFS in order for it to do the parity stuff.
Repairs and stuff.
Yeah, so ideally you would want to create a lot of separate stuff. What I did on my machine that had a RAID controller that I couldn't flash to be an IT controller was just create a bunch of one disk arrays and then let ZFS do all the work. And in this case, that way, the array in the backend isn't auto rebuilding or anything. So it depends. He's talking about a very large array, like 50 to 200 terabytes. Depending how he's doing it, yeah, I would divide it up. On my machine that has 36 disks, I did 6 VDEVs of 6 disks. You might change that around with your RAID controller there, is to create a bunch of RAID 5 or RAID 6s, and then have ZFS create a RAID Z on top of that. So go with less redundancy at the controller level, and then add the extra layer of redundancy at the ZFS level. Right? So instead of one giant RAID 6, create a bunch of small RAID 5s, and then have ZFS do a RAID Z1, which is kind of like RAID 5, on top of that. And then you'll have, if an individual disk dies or whatever, you still get the hardware controller's auto-replace functionality happening. Because when I was talking to him about it, he mentioned that, when a drive dies, it's going to be replaced by a data center tech that is not related to the people who own the box, and so won't have administrative access to type the ZFS commands or whatever. And so, they just replace the disk with the red light on. And so in this case, by combining those kind of 2 levels, you'll be able to deal with it better. And because ZFS will think that your RAID 5 array, that you get a bunch of RAID 5s, so that one of them is one disk. If they do screw up that whole array somehow, ZFS will still be able to recover that. Now, your effective free space might be slightly less with RAID Z1 on top of a set of RAID 5s than just doing one big RAID 6. But you get all the ZFS features about auto healing, because your RAID 6 isn't going to be able to do that. And if you put ZFS on top of one big RAID 6, it will detect when there's a checksum error, but it won't be able to do anything about it because there's no extra copy of the files. So you could obviously, if you need that much space, you're probably not going to be wanting to mirror split your RAID thing in half and then mirror it. And so you're going to want at least 3 logical volumes out of your RAID controller, so that you can RAID Z1 them together.
Okay.
As far as his HP Smart Array controller, I have no idea about that controller.
Yeah.
HP, I don't think they actually make their own controllers. It's just usually a rebranded version of another controller. So if it's an LSI, it probably works. And if not, I have no idea.
Okay. So we go next to Alex, who has a question about PCBSD virtual machine versus NTP. He says, hey, I use PCBSD in a virtual box. He said, instead of powering off the VM, I often just save the state. He said, after awakening from the saved state, the date is still the date when the VM was saved. Yeah, funny how that works. And the NTP service is running by default. He said, I thought NTPD would realize the date difference after awakening, but unfortunately it does not. Maybe the time delta is already too large for automatic adjustment.
That's what it is right there.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah,
too big of a change. That's bogus.
So he said, is there a way to configure it to set the correct date? So we have that set at boot time. So when you boot the system, if the drift's too large, it'll go ahead and configure it. So I guess what I would do is just trigger an NTP restart, and then it should correct the date. I don't know if there's a way to detect that you've woken up from a saved state.
I don't think, because the whole point of that feature in VirtualBox is the machine doesn't have to know that that's what's happening.
It doesn't know. Yeah.
In the ntp.conf, you might be able to adjust that maximum, when it considers the date that's being returned by the server to be not legitimate. You might be able to adjust that value so that it will accept anything from the time server, and that way NTPD will just work the way you expect
next time it runs.
Yeah. But yeah, like we said, you'll have to just, if you restart the NTPD, then when you have that sync at start option that Chris mentioned, it will do that automatically.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm paging through the man page here, and I don't see anything about the maximum thing. But yeah, that's an interesting problem because you're literally just pausing the VM. Although I thought VirtualBox was supposed to do, or has an option of tying the time in the virtual machine to the BIOS clock of the host machine. So then the time would just wildly skew when you unpaused.
So it looks like they add the -G flag to an NTPD starts, and that's what will allow it to sync regardless of the drift. But again, I don't know if that does anything after it's already running. That's only when it starts.
Yes, -G. Normally, NTPD exits with a message to the system log if the offset exceeds the panic threshold, which is 1,000 seconds by default. This option allows the time to be set to any value without restrictions. However, this can happen only once. If the threshold is exceeded after this, NTPD will exit with a message to the system log. This appears to be right.
They said take a look for the tinker command for other options.
Right. But yeah, you'd have to just restart it, I guess.
Yeah, so that's one way to fix it. You could just restart it. I don't know, maybe you could put something in cron to restart NTPD every so often, or Anacron or something. Yep. Okay, well, let's move on then here. Yes. Next up is a question from Chris asking about boot environments. So he says, hey, I'm about to upgrade my server to FreeBSD 10.0. And in preparation, I discovered the BEADM part of your tutorial on ZFS that we had done a while back, which he provides the link here. He said, I'd be interested in a more detailed explanation of what badmin actually does under the hood, which ZFS operations, etc. In particular, did I get it right that badmin only takes care of the pool name /capital root and the data sets under there? Yes, it does. Mm-hmm. He says, I would prefer an option to do a full rollback if something goes wrong. Is ZFS snapshots the right tool then? Yes, there as well.
With a caveat.
In addition, I'm not...
With a small caveat there, but yes.
Yeah, we'll get to that in just a moment. He said, in addition, I'm not sure about the case of disaster. Assuming something went wrong so badly the system cannot boot, and I noticed this only after rebooting, then I don't have any chance to run badmin, right? That is true. Yeah, you'd want to run it before that. To my knowledge, it's not installed on the live CD as well. Thanks for your answers. Keep up the great work. So we'll go back and kind of answer these in order here. So under the hood, let's start there, I guess. What does it do?
So basically, when you create a new boot environment, it's doing a clone of your a snapshot of your existing pool.
Well, it creates a snapshot at that moment when you run.
Depending on which command you use, but yes, you can either clone an existing snapshot or have it take a new snapshot and clone that immediately. Mm-hmm. And so that'll be basically the new boot environment will be an exact copy of how your system was when you ran the badmin create command. Now remember that when you create the new boot environment, you're not using it yet. And so any changes you make will be to the one you were still on, not the new one you created. So
yeah, that's just a moment in time that's saved. That's what it was when you ran that.
Or when so if you want to do one and then do an upgrade, remember that the one you created will be the before the upgrade snapshot, and your current one will be the live system. If you want to name if you want to create a new snapshot named the new version, you'd have to then switch to it, reboot, and then do the upgrade.
Correct. So he said, does it only take care of pool name /root? So by default, yes, that's what it does. And anything extra data sets you have are not included as part of the boot environment.
And that's why I think that actually comes up to somebody else's question from the other week of why the ZFS layout on the default install in 10.1 is so strange. For example, there is a /USR and a /var, but their set can mount equals no. And that's specifically so that /USR actually gets written into /, but /USR /source doesn't. So that it doesn't get included when you roll back. It stays ahead. But you want your user local to stay in sync with / so that when you, for example, upgrade your OS and also upgrade your packages, if it breaks something when you roll back, you're not using the old kernel with the new applications because it's probably the application that broke, not the kernel.
Did you change that in FreeBSD? So user local now is part of the
user local is not separate. On my servers, it still is because of the way we run our servers. But for the default 10.1, we reduce the number of data sets to only the minimum amount of stuff that doesn't get snapshotted. And
Sure.
you know,
Okay. Well, that's how we do it on PCBSD as well, because packages are just as important to us as the world half the
especially
time,
for you
so-
guys, yeah. For my
Yeah.
servers, it's not a big deal if I want to package, delete everything, and then Puppet will reinstall it all in a couple of minutes. But when
Sure.
you have 2 gigs of packages to get KDE and all of its friends, then it's a little more complicated. So then he says he would
He wants an option to do a full rollback if something goes wrong.
That's actually not possible in ZFS currently. You can do a recursive snapshot, but you can't do a recursive rollback. So you have to manually roll back each data set to that snapshot. So you can create a recursive snapshot that of your root of your pool, and it'll create that snapshot under every data set. But to roll back, you have to manually do it to each data set. I talked to Matt Ahrens about that, and he's like, that's something that will depend on the ZFS channel programs to allow you to basically do all those operations as one instead of having to do them separately. And sadly, the -R and -R flags for rollback are already taken by other stuff. And
Whoops. So we'll have a dash
or something that
recursive or something weird.
Yeah.
So he said also about the case of disaster, assuming something went wrong so badly I cannot boot, I noticed this only after rebooting. So this is interesting because true on FreeBSD, I mean, even 10.1, you don't have any way to pick the alternate boot environment, right? At this point. So this is something we do a little different.
You can set a loader variable. So during the loader, you can say boot off this data set. But you'd have to know how to do that and what your data set was called.
It's like you don't get a nice drop-down list or anything.
Yeah, so
like
on
that.
PCBSD you do.
Yeah. So if you use PCBSD or TrueOS, if you use our installer, we use the grub bootloader, which gets rewritten every time you make a boot environment or delete a boot environment. That menu gets updated so that when you reboot and say you did screw something up bad enough that you couldn't boot, right? You could just reboot again, go into the grub menu, and pick the one you want to restore to. Boot off of the one from yesterday or this morning or whatever. Right. And that handles it all for you. It does all those setting of variables and whatnot.
Now he mentions, if he boots off a live CD, obviously the badmin tool isn't there. That's correct. What you can do is import your ZFS pool while running off the live CD. Now you have to set the alt root to /mnt or whatever, and then you can chroot into it. Now, if you're going to do any commands involving ZFS inside, you have to also mount devfs inside the chroot. But then you'll be chrooted in your broken system, and you will be able to use the copy of badmin that's installed in there. Or again, as far as which boot environment to boot off of, it's actually just a one-line variable in loader.conf, which you can also set from the bootloader that just says boot off this boot environment.
Cool. Okay, well, hope we answered all your questions there, Chris. So next up is Robert asking about LSI RAID cards. He said, I've been watching old BSD Now episodes. Great show, by the way. Well, thank you. He said he came upon episode 49. A user emailed in, and you were talking about this LSI HBA card, which I guess was the specific LSI SAS 9207 8i.
Yes, I have like 6 of those in production.
Okay. He said he's been having a bit of a rambling discussion on the Gentoo forums about using a PCIe card to boost the SATA performance of an aging X58 motherboard. By the way, don't worry, I plan to install PCBSD on the machine in the near future as well. Awesome, by the way. He said, I don't need RAID support, so basically the LSI card should be perfect, but what does it significantly delay / slow down in the BIOS boot process?
Now, on my server here at the house, that's just 8 SATA cards, or 8 SATA drives plugged directly into the HBA. It doesn't slow down the boot much at all. On the server in the data center, where it's 32 drives, each connected via expanders to 2 separate 9207 8Is, means that each of the 2 controllers actually sees 64 hard drives. Because each one sees each hard drive, the 32 hard drives, and then it sees it a second time. Each controller sees 32 drives. So there's 2 controllers, and they each see every drive separately. So that if either one of the controllers dies, the other controller can run all 32 drives. So
How long does that take to ping
Like
all those disks? and boot up?
2.5 minutes or something like that. It
Oh,
takes a little
yeah.
while, especially when it's
Mhm.
you know, that's a big storage server. You don't want it to be down for long. You're like, reboot already. Plus, at first, because it has 128 gigs of RAM, FreeBSD took a while to boot, although they've changed that in 11, and there's a loader.conf variable you can set to disable the memory test, and that'll save like 4 minutes off the boot there as well.
Sure.
But on my one at home, I haven't found it to delay the boot that much. Honestly, I don't reboot that often, so it's not that big of a deal, although when I do want it to be fast.
Mhm.
But yeah, if you don't have an expander connected to it and you're just connecting drives, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. Although he mentions boosting the SATA performance of his aging X58 motherboard, switching from 3G to 6G SATA is really not going to make that much difference, especially if you're using spinning hard drives. Maybe that'll increase performance of some SSDs slightly, but I wouldn't expect to see it doesn't sound like that's
Not a huge.
I would understand
performance gain.
putting the LSI card in to get more SATA ports, but purely for performance reasons, I wouldn't expect to get much of a gain.
Okay, well, cool. Well,
And then
hope we helped you out.
The
there,
second
Robert.
part of the question, he says, most RAID
yeah.
supporting cards are awful in this respect, taking up to 1 minute faffing about detecting all the connected drives. If I never create a RAID array, this is taking years off my life. I am using the card in workstation machines after all. The response from LSI technical support to this question was not exactly being deafening. Oh, they haven't heard anything.
I guess they haven't written back.
Said
it's a lot of money to spend on a doorstop.
So you tried a Marvel SATA 6G card before. So yeah, I can't just go rebooting my server to see how long it takes, but it definitely doesn't take as long with just 8 drives connected to it as opposed to 32 with multipath. But I think in the RAID BIOS thing for the LSI card, you can adjust how long it gives each drive to respond. Although if a drive doesn't respond soon enough, the drive will appear as gone, and that will cause you just as many problems with your ZFS array. So yeah, I'm not sure how you're expecting. Upgrading from 3G to 6G is really not going to give you that much performance anyway. So.
Okay.
Next question.
Well, let's move on to Jake. Last question for the week. He has a question about pfSense shaping. He says, thanks as always for the podcast. I have a pfSense router with a dumb switch and a WRT54GL router as an access point. I have a mix of PCs, Android gadgets, and a couple of embedded entertainment devices. I'd like an intelligent way to shape traffic to some of them. I have one Ubuntu server / MythTV box that does some automatic downloading. I'd like to prioritize this machine as lowly as possible so it can do its job, but when somebody fires up Netflix, the server takes a back seat. Makes sense. I also have a Wii that's used for streaming. It's hooked up to a CRT, and it's a ways to suck down HD content to it. I'd like to shape the connection down so it streams smoothly but doesn't waste bandwidth. The rest of the clients are free to fight it out. Is it possible to shape traffic this finely?
Well,
yeah, depending on your rule set.
Let the downloading machine, your MythTV, download as fast as it wants, but if somebody else tries to do something, give that higher priority. That's a queue where you say, this traffic is higher priority than that traffic. That doesn't actually impose any limits per se. And then, but what you're talking about for the Wii is actually putting in a limit with something like DummyNet, where you would say the Wii's only allowed to have 2 megabits per second, and this will force it to never try to do to pull down the HD version of the content, because your internet connection can support the HD, but your TV doesn't, so it would be a waste. So that you would want to just have a hard limit on the amount of megabits or whatever. I've done all this with IPFW, but I've not done it with pfSense. If I remember correctly, though, pfSense does it using IPFW. Like, they actually mix IPFW and PF to do that. Although I'm not sure. Again, I've never done it with the PF queuing system.
They will write and correct us if we're wrong about that.
But I would look around the pfSense user interface and see if it can do it or not. I don't actually know. But I know it can be done. I just don't know if it can be done without having to write the rules yourself.
I'd be surprised if pfSense couldn't do this.
Right. I definitely know that they can do some traffic shaping. I just don't know how finely they can do it. The other things that it'll depend, you'll probably want to do a DHCP reservation for like your Wii and your Myth TV and so on, so that they always have the same IP address, so that you can shape based on that. Yeah. And if you want to know how to do it with IPFW, I wrote an article on doing it in the FreeBSD journal, the May-June edition, which you can view in your browser from the FreeBSDFoundation.org website now.
Okay. Cool. Well, thank you so much for writing in, Jake. I hope you can figure out how to do that via the interface there. And next up, we, of course, have some mailing list gold this week. So we'll go ahead and go right into that. So first up is a thread about real-world auth PF use. So there's several posts here, but I guess the synopsis of it would be, this is an interesting conversation about how you can use auth PF to verify users connected to the network. They have an SSH into the gateway with a valid password and key before they're granted access to the net, which then turned into a discussion about VLANs versus IPsec and other ways to segregate users and some other cool network stuff. So if that's the world you live in, you may want to take a look at this thread, see how you can do some of this.
Yeah, I can see where that'd be useful, you know. Basically, you could, you know, be sitting here and you have a remote office or something, and it's all locked down so that people on the internet can't access it. But if I SSH in, that creates the rule saying, hey, the IP address of the person who just SSH in, they're allowed to access the machines through the firewall. And then you can directly connect internally to those machines. That's really cool. I'm almost thinking that I need to set that up at my house for when I'm on the road.
Nice.
Currently, I'm using the SSH chaining, right? I SSH into the firewall and then bounce off to get to the machines inside. But authpf definitely sounds really interesting. I like that.
Yeah, that could be neat. So next we have a whole bunch of related posts here about all the Perl stuff that's happened in the FreeBSD ports tree recently. In some cases where the update went wrong, so users had to wipe their ports tree and start over, which I can see how that would make some people upset. Did you read through some of these, Alan?
I didn't read through every one of the posts, but I see the this is the SVN log of the ports updating file, and says there's a nasty bug introduced. It looks like it was only there for a couple of revisions, but it made quite a mess. And if you did, in fact, update during that time, you'll need to wipe your entire ports tree clean. Like you will actually have to, even if you're using PortSnap, not do an update, but actually like delete user ports and PortSnap extract.
Or if you're using Subversion, you can revert -R. But I guess the symptoms are if you see a whole bunch of .packlist, no such file or directory errors, then yeah, you will want to do that. Sorry, that's annoying.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
And yes,
we didn't run into that one. I didn't.
Well, it looks like if you're looking at the revision numbers, there are only 10 revisions. So with the ports tree gets revised quite often, I would say that was probably there for less than an hour. But obviously, looking at the mailing list, it was enough to hit quite a few people.
Well, in PCBSD, our luck in the past has been that would be when we do the pull, right? It's right in the middle of something like that. So we lucked out this time and didn't do a pull in the middle of all that. So that was good. Okay, so that's the end of the mailing list goal for the week. So as we wrap up here, a couple things we want to mention. So first up, if you're in New York's Capital District, there's a meeting which is going to be happening for the BSD users group on December 9th. So we have a link to the post on the New York City Bug.org site about that. So take a look, see if you can make it out there, meet up with other BSD folks. And also, of course, we want to mention if you have any questions, comments, show ideas, topics, or stories you want to see mentioned on the show, please send them in to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and we'd appreciate that. If there's a tutorial you'd like to see, or if you know somebody who's doing some really cool work in the BSD community and you want us to interview, and it can be any of the BSDs, OpenNet, Dragonfly, FreeBSD, etc., let us know. We would appreciate that. And of course, you can watch live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1900 UTC. And also a reminder, just like last week during the interviews, we of course love to hear how all our viewers and listeners first got into BSD. So we're asking you guys to email us your story, either with a written or a video version, and we'll read and play some of them for the Christmas episode. So kind of a special, how did you get started on BSD?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see the answers of some of the users. Right? We've interviewed lots of developers, but you know, up until recently, I was just a user too. And so, yeah, it's really nice to hear the stories of the various people and how they first got into it and what they like about it and all that. So, yeah, I'm looking
Nice.
forward to that. It actually should be a really, really cool Christmas episode.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. That'll be a unique episode as opposed to just a short one that we'll record because we're not there.
Yep.
So if you have a neat story, or even if you don't think it's neat, we may find it interesting.
Yes.
Send it in. It's
Seeing the ones from the various developers has been really interesting. A
mhm,
lot of them was like, oh, I started with Linux and then somehow I got introduced to BSD and then I stuck with it. Or, I
right.
remember it was Colin Percival's was his OpenBSD router died and he couldn't figure out the OpenBSD installer. So sysinstall is the reason why Colin Percival is a
That's right.
FreeBSD developer instead of an OpenBSD developer. Or
Nice.
was it Beg Erling was because he was into the demo scene, making those tiny little executables that had music and animations and stuff. And he wanted something
Mhm.
better than DOS to build them on. So his friend gave him a FreeBSD 2 CD or something like that.
Nice.
And that's how he got into it and so on.
Cool.
Also,
Well, please get
yeah.
those. Oh, go ahead.
Also a reminder that the donation drives for the various BSD foundations like NetBSD, OpenBSD, FreeBSD are running now. And I noticed on the FreeBSD one, they changed their goal from get $1 million now that they've actually gone over 2. They're actually now trying to reach a goal of 2,000 community donors. So not corporations, but individual people donating. And so it'd be nice to see them reach that goal. So even if you're just donating $5, do that and help the foundations show that they're not just a trade group of a couple of companies. Is actually broad public support for the community and the project.
Nice. Looks like they're already up over 1,000 a little bit.
Yep.
So yeah, definitely.
And I noticed
a small amount is
somebody
fine,
didn't want their name on the list, so they put the donation on behalf of BSD Now.
which we appreciate you doing that. That is really cool.
But yes, we'd love to
So-
see as many different names on that list as possible. So go ahead. But if
Definitely.
you're shy and don't want to put your name on the list, you can put it in honor of your favorite developer or whatever.
Or whatever is
Mhm.
fine. Also, you got until December 17th to send us those videos on your story or your written stories on how you first got into BSD. So please try and get those in. You got about 2 weeks to do that.
And unlike
We'll,
the conference deadline, we're not going to extend it because it's already
we
cutting it
can't.
short. So you really got to get that done now. So please take the time and do that today.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for being with us this week. We'll be back same time next week.